Good morning, good morning, good morning. We're here at Friendly House at the Humanists of Greater Portland Sunday morning meeting. Uh, Very important topic today. I'm really thrilled to have our speaker here. HGP believes strongly in freedom of speech, but views expressed by myself, to our reader, today's speaker, HGP members, and our guests are not the official views of the Humanists of Greater Portland. I want to especially welcome anyone who is new to HGP. We are very honored that you've chosen to join us today. If you're comfortable towards the end, I hope you'll be willing to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you heard about that. And that includes the folks on Zoom too. I just want to know how much we appreciate the folks that are attending through our Zoom contact. Just as a quick definition, we're here at a humanist meeting. What is that? Humanism is a non-theistic philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Humanists strive to lead meaningful and ethical lives using reason and empathy to guide their decisions. We strive to live meaningful lives because we honor the fact that this is the only life of which we are certain. We acknowledge all that humans have accomplished in the arts and sciences and humanities, and by truly honoring the dignity and worth of all people, humanists aspire to a life filled with peace and well-being when people cooperate and interact with respect for one another. Joyce is our reader today. Joyce is attending on Zoom. Come on, Joyce, and always a pleasure when you're the reader.
All right. The reading is from the IndianaExpress.com opinion section from April of 2025. So it could be a bit dated already. Things are changing so fast. But the title is Trump versus Harvard is not just about Harvard. In America, as in every democracy, the promise of its founding ideals is only partially met by the society and politics of the day. In the current moment, however, this gap has widened to a chasm, with the Trump administration wielding its mandate as a weapon against some of the country's most elite and perhaps elitist universities. It would be a mistake, however, to view the crackdown on Harvard, Columbia, and others as a struggle between islands of privilege and a government that represents grassroots impulses trying to have its way. It is, in effect, an attack on the core principles that have led to the US's rise and sustained its power, and counterproductive, therefore, for a government that purports, quote, to make America great again. For over 75 years, the US federal government has given grants and provided funds to the country's universities. This investment has more than paid off. It has produced knowledge and innovation that is the bedrock of the US's economic, military, and technological might. Why then is the government attacking the foundation on which its greatness was built? The university has become a front in the culture wars that define US politics today. On one side is a president, slavish courtiers fawning over him, disrupting and destroying in the name of the people. On the other side, institutions like Harvard, riddled with issues such as legacy admissions and self-serving elite that uses political correctness to stifle many a debate. These have failed to make the case, though arguably it is not their job to do so, that they should be subsidized by the taxpayer. The Trump administration's attack is part of a broader attempt at controlling spaces that have symbolized autonomy and excellence. One is not possible without the other, within the country and across the world. At its best, the US campus represents the finest of the country's principles: freedom of speech, commitment to ensuring diversity, and opening ourselves to talent from every corner of the US and the world. The federal government's demands, including restrictions on hiring faculty, reducing diversity in admissions, and policing the political views of teachers and students, severely shrink this space. Harvard President Alan N. Garber has maintained the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. The battle between the universities and government will have echoes beyond the campus. For when governments impose an environment of fear, there is little space for innovation, and the campus can easily slide into becoming a place most unlike itself, a factory.
Oh, Joyce, thank you so much. That was important. Thank you. Thank you, Joyce. That was a timely reading and much appreciated. If you would like to do a reading in the future, sign into HGP as a member, and under that member tab, there is sign-up sheets, and you'll find an open spot. I think there's several right now. You can read anything, anything that you find interesting, and certainly what Joyce did today was a fine example of that. Thank you, Joyce. I'd now like to invite or give you a little bit of information about our speaker today. Professor Vivek Shandas will be presenting Preparing for the Coming Climate. Dr. Shandas serves as professor of geography at Portland State University, where he examines the role of regional climate systems and how they drive decisions about the built environment and social justice. Dr. Shandas' projects have been featured in the New York Times, National Geographic, Scientific American, Times of India, CNN, Cosmos, and dozens of other media outlets. He has over 100 publications, 5 books, and serves as a consultant and technical advisor to public and private and nonprofit organizations. In 2023, he was appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture to serve on the National Urban and Community Forestry Advisory Council. Other recent appointments include the National Climate Assessment and the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine. Dr. Shandas has degrees in biology, environmental policy, economics, and a doctorate in urban design and planning from the University of Washington. It's a real honor, Dr. Shandas, to have you join us today, and so appreciated. Thank you. We'll be taking questions at the end. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Very
yeah.
good.
Yeah, I'm counting on it.
You'll enjoy this, gang, that if you like
This is
questions.
not my story. This is our story. So,
very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
On it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. The humanists are new to me, and I'm making some sense of how this reading that Joyce just provided really resonated with me, because in part I'm seeing this on a daily basis in my day job at the university. So you might think I'm missing an article in that title of the, but there is really no the coming climate. It's a coming climate, and I want to try to make this as humanly accessible as possible. One of the things that I've been really struggling with this broader conversation about climate is that it's a very big thing to wrap our minds around, and it tends to just create more apathy than anything else, because folks are like, oh, what do I do with this? This is so big, it's so complex. I don't know where I can even contribute. Maybe I'll, take the bus, or maybe I'll do these things, and all fine and well. Though what I'm trying to do, most of my work now has been trying to bring the climate of everyday life into people's awareness, and that's really part and parcel of the broader humanist agenda with you today. So I'll dive right into this. I wanted to think about this from a very accessible point of view, and so that's part of where I'm going with this. This is we're about a little over a month out from trick or treat season, and this was a little comic I saw recently, and it really helped me kind of wrap my mind around how these seasons are actually shifting right now. And we're seeing this in empirical terms. The climate models have been showing this emerging for a while, but we're seeing seasons, kind of summers stretch into May, at least in the Pacific Northwest, stretch into early June into May as well. And we're seeing them stretch out to October just again on a average long-term trend that we've been seeing over time. There are going to be days like this in late September where we get a cold spell, but generally what we see over time is this upward trajectory of temperatures. And so this comic helped me kind of make sense of what's happening and how we're kind of trying to humanize some of this work. Just a little bit about me. I grew up for the first 10 years of my life in about 8 degrees above the equator in South India, and where trains were a big part of my life. It's how I got around. The British arrived in India and around the same time the US was founded and started building out a number of things. One of them is a big infrastructure system of trains. And that was a big part of my life, going to see my family in different parts of the country. And it was a thrill. It was really, really fun. You get to stick your head out the window. You get to feel the breeze. There are all kinds of people selling from food to saris to clothing to all kinds of things on the train at the train stations. And it's just a really lively experience. And so I thought I'd draw on that a little bit for my thought about 3 different trains today. And the 3 different trains I want to talk about, let's see if I can get this to work. Oh, it's not advancing. Huh. Did I?
No, you didn't do anything wrong. It just sometimes.
Oh, I see. Yes, I know. Great. Okay, yeah, it does. So I wanted to start with this simple train story. This has been around 80 years. It's kind of a classic in the US. It's been there for many children to kind of grow up on. Some of you in the room may have heard about Thomas the Train growing up, and I want to kind of compare Thomas to a couple of other trains. I want to call this train Chug Chug. This is the train which will think about the climate train. This is an unpredictable, variable speed train that's gaining momentum and hard to stop. This is the rising average temperatures, if you will. The argument here for building this train and keeping it running is that there's a precedent for this. There's a long history of doing things the way we have. We've built our cities the way we have. We've built our infrastructure the way we have. There's an argument here that it's familiar and that it took centuries to build, so let's keep it like this, right? So that's the climate train. It's got implications of that we'll get into here. There's another train that I'm also spending a lot of time thinking about these days, and that's Huff Huff. This is the housing and infrastructure train. This train is filled with people. It's crumbling. It's dated. It runs on deferred maintenance. And this infrastructure train is well established. We have hundreds of trillions of dollars of infrastructure across the US that's right now deferred. It has deferred maintenance and has a number of implications for how we go about fixing it. It's very expensive to fix. And we've heard conversations about infrastructure and that it mostly works. So let's not spend all the money right now. Let's wait till a catastrophic failure is the subtext before we actually go in and put anything into it. And that's been unfortunate, though that is part of the train story right now. And the train that I think about a lot right now is this train, because if you read into this, there's a lot about this, about a fair, relational, optimistic, and a very collective action story that emerges out of Thomas and many other stories like this. And the argument here is that Thomas is very responsive to the needs of the time. Thomas is very evidence-based. I mean, if there's not a track there, Thomas is not going to go forward. And Thomas is highly sought after. Multiple friends and other trains want to be around Thomas. And this is something that we are often, in many ways, not really spending much time thinking about, is the opportunity or the direction that we might need to be going. The alternative argument, if you will, for it still works and it's familiar. Right. So this is a different kind of an argument, and I think an argument I want to at least get to eventually in this presentation. And so as I dig into some kind of heavier, though grounded concepts right now, I will just divide this up into about 2/3 of what I'm going to say right now is going to be setup. And about 1/3 is where Thomas arrives of the push forward and the trajectory that I'm going to make a case for. And I use these, I will say, opportunities to present as kind of ways to think through things. And this is not a canned presentation per se. It's an opportunity for us to engage in dialogue. This collective action that Thomas is all about is really, I'm hoping to engage you with. I do this in my classes as well, but some context. This is one of my favorite graphs of the Earth's climate history. It talks about a time 65 million plus years ago, when in fact, if you've been to Eastern Oregon to the Natural History Museum, you will see there were horses that had rhinoceros type, not fur, but a shell almost around them with horns. There were dogs that lived in trees. I mean, this land, you would not recognize it during the hot house, warm house period of 65 million years ago. We've had several other shifts in the Earth's climate that have been documented for millions of years. And where we are now, very interestingly, is this period where we have essentially gotten a much cooler period. This is a lot of glaciers occurred here. There were miles of glaciers that were occurring, above us for quite a period of time. About 10,000 years ago. And now what we're starting to see is this rapid warming that's starting to occur on the right side of the graph. And where the blue background ends is where we are in terms of the climate futures that we might encounter. And this is, again, we don't have a crystal ball. We have the best information and data that we can collect, run a series of different analyses to try to understand what might happen as we enter the next 50, 70, 100 years. And so this helped me to illustrate, this helps me illustrate that there are a lot of variation that happens on the planet as expected. Especially in a planet like ours that has an atmosphere and that can hold in a lot of the sun's solar radiation as it comes onto the Earth every day. Let's see if this will work. Okay. Got it. So that's kind of chug. Huff's challenge here is that we have warming summers as we've documented. There's a lot of infrastructure that we've already laid down in our cities. This infrastructure wasn't designed or built for what we're starting to see happen around the world. We're starting to see rain, what's called cloud bursts, these moments where clouds just create a deluge of water coming down. And the pipes that are under this building, under these roads and sidewalks that you've been on today, they weren't designed for that amount of water to come through a system. And so what we are starting to see is a lot more what we call pluvial flooding, not fluvial from rivers, but pluvial, which is this urban flooding that starts to happen when the infrastructure is just not able to accommodate that amount of surge of water moving through. And that's recurrent. And we're seeing this many, many places around the world. And we're also paved down, which I'll talk about today, we put down a lot of hard materials, great for cars and moving people around and keeping the mud at bay, which was a big challenge in the early 20th centuries. Though we paved out our cities heavily, which of course moves that water really quickly into the undersized sewer systems, though also amplifies temperatures as the sun beats down on it on hot days and creates these pockets of heat that we'll talk about in a little bit. And some recent work coming out of some folks in the East Coast that I've been following is essentially showing models of what future climates might look like in places. They're called climate analogs. What will Portland be like in 2080? Maybe long after we're here, but nevertheless, maybe family or friends are going to be here. And Portland is anticipated to be a lot like Sacramento. That's the idea, is that our climate is shifting, not maybe gradually, but it's shifting to be more like Sacramento, much more dry days above 100, as we'll talk about, going to be up in 10 to 12 to 15 days above 100 regularly per year on average again. And so we've seen this with like Tampa being more like southern Mexico, and Minneapolis more like parts of Oklahoma City, et cetera. And so we're seeing these shifts, and we're anticipating these shifts, and we're seeing our average temperatures kind of already start to trend in that direction. So this is Huff's challenge. There's a lot of infrastructure down. We're seeing big shifts happen in places. And so that's at the kind of planetary or even like country scale. And what I'd like to spend a little bit of time on relatively quickly is talking about the places that you and I inhabit, like where we spend our time and what that looks like. In a neighborhood that has this form, you'll notice on one side, there's actually a tree over here. I'm sorry, there's actually a street over here that's completely covered in trees. Whereas just a block away, there's a street completely unblocked by trees. And so what we see is a chance that there's people walking on those sidewalks would have a very different experience of place than folks walking just one block away. And this might happen for a parent taking a child to school in the morning on that street who might be asthmatic. Walking on this street on a hot day would likely trigger an asthma response, whereas walking on that tree-lined street might not. And so we have these very localized experiences of place that I've been really getting more and more into. And this is 2 blocks away from that neighborhood where you can actually palpably and measurably see that there's fundamental differences in the way that the buildings are designed, the amount of green space that's there, the level of tending and care that's occurred in this neighborhood to be able to potentially shore up the preparedness for these extreme events that might hit this neighborhood. So there's a very noticeable difference within just a couple of miles away. I grew up in a neighborhood over here in South India. This is my neighborhood apartment building that I grew up in called Dudlani Apartments, and they had monkeys climbing those banyan trees on the side. I would get home from school essentially a second grader and see my mom being accosted by monkeys in the kitchen and have to clank my pans to get them out of the apartment. And that was kind of how I was brought into this understanding of humans and the environment, is this everyday experience of nature. And where we ended up was this apartment complex in Northern California that was essentially, and this house that was essentially a very different setup, very different. No monkeys, no chickens, no cows, nothing that I could find that was alive and moving around me except people. And so that got me really thinking, like, what is the role that this shift of place and my interaction with everyday experiences tells me about what are things that would help me stay safe in an environment. Though the monkeys were naughty and obnoxious and a little bit scary, it was still an everyday thing for me, and it didn't put me off at all, though the traffic right outside this apartment building put me off quite a bit more than that set of monkeys that were running through. And so then my first paper route was in this place, just down the street. When I was about 12 years old, I had a job throwing papers to porches in this manufactured home park. And that got me thinking about this place. How do people here manage these enormous deluge of water that falls? What about when it gets extremely hot? What do people in these places do when those kinds of events occur? And then going a little bit further, when I was living in college, I lived in an apartment. This isn't it, but it looked a lot like this. And so what would an apartment like this look like or feel like in everyday experience as we see these and experience these shifts of both temperature and potential smoke and other climate-induced events that show up? This is what we're building all over, and I've studied this set of buildings, as well as many other types of infrastructure that Huff the train would point to as something that we are familiar, and it generally works. It houses people. We're building this all over the country right now. 2 stories, sometimes 3. Sometimes perimeter block, sometimes with metal roofs, sometimes with concrete composite roofs, though really with an asphalt slapped on right out front. We're building these. Everyone's like, we've always done this. And so what I'm trying to do is scratch the surface of this and see, well, how does this hold up? If we're talking about more smoke, if we're talking about more heat, if we're talking about more rain, as some of these extreme events are growing in intensity and frequency, does this historic type of infrastructure work for human health and well-being? And that's really where most of this work has gone, because what we're seeing are the trends. This is some work we did with some folks out of North Carolina to just look at what Portland might look like, starting here, going back about from 1971 to 2000, if you can't read this. This goes a little bit further to 2050. This goes to 2071. This goes to 2050, oops, 2041, 2050, and I think that's 2100. And what we're seeing is essentially days above 100 going up generally, days above 95 going up, and days above 90 going up. And that's a model. That's a model. It follows trends that we've been seeing, and and we're starting to see in 100 years about 10.2 degrees Fahrenheit on average hotter in the summer here in the city, in the Pacific Northwest. That's background temperatures, not to mention these heat waves that would come through, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So just to wear my professor hat for 1 second, this is probably not news to you, but generally speaking, just want to give a quick overview of the relationship between how some of this broader planetary impacts, broader planetary influences affect our health and well-being. Greenhouse gas effects, sun, shortwave radiation, energy packed, comes onto the earth every day. Some of it gets bounced by clouds. Most of it gets absorbed by the land and the materials that we build with. There's an atmosphere that holds a lot of that in and on the planet as well, which is what we generally refer to. Those affect, there's just a lot more energy in the atmosphere as a result. And so generally what's happening when you hear about global warming or global heating or global weirding is that there is a trapped amount of energy in the atmosphere. And so heat is the primary mechanism by which the entire climate system is shifting right now. There's just more heat held on the planet now than there was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and in terms of human habitation. That heat drives a number of regional weather changes. Those are extreme events such as the cloudbursts. We have a recent phenomenon called flash drought that comes through. When a heat wave comes through a place, the soil dries up really quickly because there's just so much energy that's hitting that soil. All of that evaporates and the soil becomes really parched and dry relatively quickly. Farmers are concerned, of course. Trees in the Northwest, we're watching those to see how that affects. So that temperature variability and precipitation variability then has a number of ways that plays out to affect humans. And those differences in regional weather have direct human health effects, such as heat-related illness or flood and storm-related deaths, air pollution effects, waterborne food diseases, vector-borne. Just yesterday, I was reading a paper that came out that talked about how climate would affect skin cancer, and I was like, what is that relationship? And their argument mechanism was that because it's warming, people are spending more time outside. And since they're spending more time outside, they're more exposed to that sun's direct radiation, and that could lead to an increased number of. So we're discovering these things in real time as they're emerging, and so this is kind of the field that I'm spending much of my time in right now, is this relationship between extreme weather and human health. Because part of what we can do is think about what are the moderating influences. Are we in a building that's got super porous windows? When there's a wildfire smoke event, does that smoke come into the building much more easily? Are we in a place that has very little insulation? So when it's really cold and we have an extreme cold event, that our heaters or our warming systems don't keep us warm in situations. So what are those particular moderating influences? And then where I'm spending most of my time is this bottom right here called adaptation measures. What can we do? Where's our agency as collectively, individually, to be able to respond to what we're seeing happening on a planetary and translated to a local level? Don't want to spend too much time on this. Kind of background. Heat is a case study that I've been spending a lot of time on. It's very expensive. Just generally speaking, we're starting to see economic analyses come out now, and it turns out to be one of the most costly events. We hear about floods and hurricanes destroying infrastructure, though when you think about human life, when you think about energy, when you think about all the medical bills associated to heat, it's a very expensive phenomenon that we're contending with. And as the planet warms and we have these dark surfaces, this lack of vegetation, which we'll get into in a minute here, various different systems that we've set up over the last 150 years, that's where we start seeing a real impact. And my work really, as I was saying earlier, in this case study is really around how does the physical geography, how does the infrastructure, and how do planning practices intersect in order to affect human health and well-being. And public health and planning agencies have little evidence. So part of what my job has been is to provide evidence to planning and public health and emergency management agencies to try to make sense of it. And one way we did this starting in about a decade ago was to just collect lots of data. We just went out and collected hundreds of thousands of measurements. You may have seen these maps. They've made their way around the city and region. This is just Portland, though we've done it for the whole metro region. And in fact, have done it now in 120 regions around the world. It started here, and now we've kind of expanded it and taken it all over. The morning temperature, the red being the hottest areas of the city, airport up here, the whole kind of inner southeast, northeast, northwest, northeast, lots of built infrastructure. The heat is held. The sun holds the buildings that are in these areas, generally that are red. There's a lot of infrastructure there. It holds that sun's energy all night long and then lets it go in the morning. And the sensors we use are able to measure that. In the afternoon, the heat moves in different ways. And we actually see it showing up a lot more along 205 and 82nd Avenue out here in East Portland. We still see the airport. We still see some parts of the northeast and southeast areas, as well as the parts of these more macadam built out areas in the afternoon getting really hot. And then in the evening, what we say is that heat gets baked in. It starts to really, as you would take a cake out of the oven, you wouldn't take it out early. Similarly, this, because it's not set, what happens is the heat gets set in this evening period, and it holds, and all that built hard surfaces, it retains it. And when you sleep at night, that's what the most challenging part of heat, because those who live in these neighborhoods often tend to be, the hottest areas tend to be having low English proficiency, high racial diversity, extreme poverty. They have less air conditioning, and they tend to be, in this case, Asian and older adults. And these pockets of higher temperatures, which are about 20 degrees from one part of the city to another, tend to be affecting these communities very disproportionately. And that's where we see a lot of inequities starting to show up in the distributional effects of this one issue. This showed up very plainly for us when we saw this monster of a heat dome in June of 2021. Were any of you here in June of 2021? I'm curious. Oh yeah, most of you, yeah. Yeah, and it was one of those moments where we're like, wow, can this really happen? And about 7 years ago, not to say I told you so, but I told you so. I was talking to some folks at the city and regional government and state agencies, and we had workshops on heat, and they were like, this is cute. Great, keep doing the work. It's a temperate climate. We don't get these events coming through, but Arizona, yeah, if we're there, we would take action. And it's like, okay, I'll keep doing the work. And that's kind of what we saw come through in 2021 was the number of people who were hospitalized was a hockey stick graph. It was like one of these immediate, it made COVID seem not that serious when we see this kind of an intense heat wave come through. And what ended up happening was we saw more people die of heat than any other natural hazard. And so that's a consistent pattern. It's not just here in Portland. And we were able to even identify the places where people would die in the 2021 heat dome. And so we made this map in 2016. That was, enough time to prepare possibly for a heat event that happened 5 years 5 years later. What was interesting is we did another analysis that looked at the amount of tree shade, the amount of change in tree shade across the city. And we were finding that from 2014 to 2020, the amount of tree shade really went down. In some neighborhoods, a lot more than others. And you may have seen this work as well. Though the city council testimony that I made tried to draw these lines very tightly and saying, we did this heat mapping work. There's a landscape that's changing considerably with the removal of cooling features, adaptation measures on the landscape, where tree canopy is coming down a lot more in these East Portland neighborhoods. This is the purple with the most amount of loss. The green is the most amount of gain of tree canopy and shade. And what we saw is that this was until 2020. Remember, the heat dome happened in 2021. And then when we look at the data of mortality and morbidity, it was hard to unsee this pattern, right? The hottest places of Portland here in the evening, the most tree canopy loss here, and the greatest number of fatalities occurring in the very similar location. And, you know, again, could say I told you so. This isn't rocket science. It was a relatively easy pattern to observe well before this event this event showed up. And we're going to see more of these. These are anomalies to a certain extent, but they will happen again in the foreseeable future. And the Earth is going through some dramatic transition right now with the amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, and we're going to see these shifts emerge. Maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, though in the coming years, that's the climate that we're essentially looking at. I went to every one of the residences that died in the Portland metro region anyway, and was able to talk to several of the families who lost family members in this event. And it was really a tragic event, because much of what we see is that it was older adults that were living in older buildings. And what we're seeing with this also is that they were living in buildings that looked very similar to the first job I had as a paper route delivery boy. And it was these little manufactured homes that we were seeing in RV parks, right? Mobile homes. They were seeing multifamily residences like I was noticing with the asphalt all around it. We were seeing tiny single family homes that had relatively old little insulation. That's what we were seeing across this particular time period of where people were dying. And most people, when it gets hot, go inside. And so what your conditions are in your home is hard to know. Everyone has their own like fans or cooling approaches. There were people I talked to said, you know, I just sat in a bathtub all day because it was so hot. Other people are like, I just kept putting cold cloths over my head. People weren't opening their windows during that. And so we were seeing one mobile home park was actually, we were able to measure it at about 137 degrees inside the mobile home park. And that is legal, it turns out. And I'll come back to that in a second. You have to have, every habitable space has to be able to get up to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, right? In order to be able to have in a home, that's a code requirement. But it can get up 170 degrees if so be it. That's part of how we've set up our code in most cities across the country at this point. This isn't new. We've been here before. This is something that happened in July 95. This was infamous. Numerous other heat waves have happened. This one was probably arguably the most well documented. There's a whole book called The Social Autopsy of a Heat Wave, written by Eric Kleinenberg. The book's called Heat Wave, and he documented all of the reasons why people were afraid to go out of their homes during this and essentially baked in their homes. And that was a very chilling, it's a chilling read in terms of how similar the factors that played out in 95 played out in Chicago, played out in Portland 26 years later. Almost identical if you were to just look at it a little more closely. So that's kind of a lot of context, but kind of coming around the corner, there's a number of mechanisms I touched on where climate change affects the series of vulnerability factors, exposure pathways, and the capacity of the health system to actually respond. I was just on my way here on a bus, and I noticed that on the side of the bus, there's a 14-gallon mention, and it's the amount of water required during a major earthquake when the water mains are expected to break. And one person can go about 2 weeks, is the argument, with about 14 gallons of water. And so part of what I inferred from that billboard was that we are largely on our own in these extreme events. Right? The public agencies have some capacity, and that capacity quickly runs dry when we see these extreme events come through. So the connections you have here at Friendly House, the connections you have in your neighborhood, the connections you have with family members, et cetera, are kind of the lifeline in many respects. And that's where this health system capacity and resilience is where is a really tricky part. I'm trying to do everything I can as a public servant in a sense for providing the best available science to the agencies that are trying to build capacity. Again, they are limited. And right now, with contraction of public agencies that we're seeing happening right now, it's very likely that we're going to see a kind of a cascading series of events should an extreme event show up. So now's a good time to get 14 gallons, just saying. I can say that it's largely out of reach. What we're finding is that, generally speaking, is that the direct involvement of those, we're thinking that the government would take care of this. Oh, an event's going to happen, government. And those of you who have been through extreme events, you might know that it is largely not true. And it's nothing to say against local government, federal government, et cetera. It's to say that that empirically is not the evidence that I am looking at, and that people who are directly impacted by extreme events are often not directly engaged in the preparedness work that's needed to And so this is where I take the corner of this work and say that what's needed is a lot more of this collective action types of exercises where much more localized groups like at Friendly House or like neighborhood associations or even block parties. I've been a big fan of bringing people together to talk to one another about what does it mean to actually go through events. It may not happen next week. It may not happen in a month. But a year ago, I had this conversation with my 87-year-old neighbor who doesn't have AC and who basically turns on a fan during extreme events. Maybe I go knock on the door and check and see how this person's doing. So simple, so beautifully simple, actually. And it's this kind of stuff of collective action, of actively engaging communities, is where our work has been really trying to build more resilience at the localized scale. And I use this conceptual diagram just so to kind of wrap my mind around it, because it's a lot to try to do. I try to think about two factors. One is the degree of understanding a community has about an extreme event or the implications of it. And the other is the degree of engagement that an individual or a community has. And when you go through this, you can kind of think about this as, you know, what we're constantly doing is down here. It's a D or a C, the status quo. We're constantly low level of engagement and maybe a higher level of understanding, though very little engagement. This is pretty much where we're working right now in much of this emergency management, community resilience type of work. Where we're headed and where we need to go is into this quadrant up here, where we're actually talking about collectively raising the understanding of communities to respond to things. And let me show you a few examples of what I mean, because this conceptually might you can maybe wrap your minds around, but what we're really trying to get at is ways to do this. And I've found a few ways that this has been really effective to get us to higher degrees of understanding and higher levels of engagement. And what we've done is use this approach, for example, as a heat action planning approach, where we're essentially going through a series of steps of establishing context, describing the hazard, identifying roles, in this case of greening, and then providing implementation guidance for projects. And it's really about supporting the generation of relevant knowledge for accelerating action. That's kind of what we're doing. And here's a few examples. You might have seen this happen. This has been happening all over. This is where we provide community members with these little sensors that they're able to put on their bicycles, their backpacks, their cars, and we get several hundred people going out collecting hundreds of thousands of temperature measurements and humidity measurements. And they do this across one day, a hot day. In this case, it was July 22nd, a couple of years ago. And they collected about 269,000 individual measurements. When you look at your phone and see the temperature, you're seeing the temperature at the airport, right? When we go out and collect 260,000 individual measurements, you're getting it down to your city street or your block. You're getting it down to a much more granular description, which arguably, which I'm making the case, makes it more tangible, makes it more real. And what we have done is generate these maps that I showed you, one of those of Portland. This is the metro region, of similar morning, afternoon, evening maps. We have workshops that we do with community members after they go out and collect these data and kind of unpack it. And we had, in this case, about 125 volunteers showing up, doing this work across the region. And so that's one piece. Close your eyes if you're a zombie scared here, but we do this other thing where we work with folks who aren't necessarily engaged in the conversation. These are high school students who I mean, right now there is a surge of interest in the climate work at high school students. And I get emails literally once a week from a high school student somewhere in the region saying, I'm really interested in doing this work and I want to do this in my future. And so we created this little exercise where there's a zombie apocalypse, imagine. And we know that zombies don't like heat, right? We know they like cold, dank, dark places. And so we said we had this little exercise where we worked with high school students in late spring, early summer, where we had this little scenario we played out. And we gave them little infrared cameras that they mount on their phones. They're little cameras that stick to their phone, or if they didn't have one, we would provide this phone where they could take photos of their neighborhood. And we would ask them to go to places where the zombies don't show up, the hottest places in the neighborhood. So easy enough engagement-wise, they went out, collected these pictures. This one is actually in Yonkers. We did this in Westchester County in Yonkers, New York, and found that these were some low-income residents in the projects in Yonkers, and they went out, took pictures of the parking lot next to their home, next to their, just like that asphalt parking lot I had shown earlier, that's where they were living. They took pictures like, I would hang out in the asphalt parking lot. In fact, one student said, since this location was 126 degrees, it goes into the category of few zombies can survive, though most will not. And we get these narratives coming back from the students about how to characterize a very local experience. And we did this similarly with a school. This was in Boulder, Colorado, where we went out and collected a lot of samples of temperature with students. And we were able to talk about what this means from a data literacy point of view, from a local place point of view. Wow, that grass is so much warmer than this. The dry grass is so much warmer than this wet grass. Why could that be? And so it allows folks to be much more bringing that climate and broader global thing right to their schoolyard. And that has allowed us to really have a lot more access to meaningful conversations about their local environment. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Maybe suffice to say that we do other work where we're modeling neighborhood change. So Portland is upzoning, so there's a lot more density showing up in Portland with the residential infill project, right? So we wanted to know, without infill, what if you were to just remove all the green space from a neighborhood? Just like all these trees we see out here in this neighborhood, we just mow them all down and we just lay down a bunch of asphalt, just a scenario. And another is that we take any places where there is opportunity for putting trees or shrubs or smaller plants, and we plant it and we create this other scenario. And then we can use university computational model the infrastructure to essentially think about like a video game like SimCity or something where you simulate a particular place, you change its physical parameters, and then you push a lot of hot air through it. And with that, we're finding that this asphalt example here was raising temperatures in that neighborhood, background temperatures, by about 13 degrees Fahrenheit. That's just keeping all things, holding everything else steady, constant, and then pushing a lot of hot air. So what we're up for is not only a shifting climate, but our infrastructure is going to be retaining a lot more heat and amplifying background temperatures. And so that was another piece that we're doing. And finally, last piece I'll touch on is the modeling piece is a little less community direct, though it was working directly with decision makers in the Planning Bureau. This was working with residents in affordable housing developments where people had died during the heat dome. So we worked with Home Forward and set up little sensors in about 50 different units in 3 buildings across the city. And we wanted to know how were indoor temperatures faring with the outdoor temperatures, because we really don't have good information on what it's like inside anyone's residence. And so we set up those, and then we conducted workshops with those folks because they wanted to know why this was happening. And so we were able to find that there are times when temperatures in the later 8 p.m. actually hit about almost, this is nearing 90 degrees, and it maintains above about 85, which is for some residents harmful to human health when it gets above 85 degrees in a residence, especially for a prolonged period of time. We're finding this, and we put a report together, conducted workshops, which are really interesting with the community, and the community had identified a number of different, five different categories of recommendations that were then directly given to Home Forward, the city, the Housing Bureau, to say, essentially, here are some things that could really help us stay cool. And so it was driving this kind of feedback directly from the affected communities to the decision makers about what would be helpful. And it varied quite a bit. We have a couple of papers we put together on this, and it was really our attempt to try. I know some of you are involved with this NET program, and that's a wonderful way to kind of build into this some of the community resilience aspect, emergency response teams. Though there were several others. For example, like extending cooling hours that were in the building. There's no space in most multifamily residential buildings where if your AC breaks, or if you don't have AC, or you don't want to run your AC because it's really expensive, there's no place you can go and actually stay cool during that time. And so there's really a lot of these very relatively simple low-hanging fruit fixes that we identified through working directly with those community members. Not too much time on this. Ultimately, we're trying to get this out into plans and documents. And while we can say best laid plans, we also want to try to codify this in some direct way within planning systems. And the final piece I want to just throw at you, I know there's a lot here, is that don't take my word for it. There's so much literature on this emerging right now. And here's just at least 3 relatively recent books that have come out that I think are enormously valuable for this conversation. So I'll leave it at that. I'm here to chat these books. This is a chilling experience. Lots of Oregon examples in both of these, and this one as well. Worth really kind of spending a little time on getting familiar with this, because we are in a big transformative time right now. So let me just make a pitch for, there was this indoor cooling, you can't see it because of the closed caption, but there's an indoor temperature maximum threshold for rental properties bill that was introduced last year. And Boston just passed, Cambridge just passed this. There's several cities that have already set precedent for this. It was brought up by Senator Jama in the Oregon State Legislature, but it didn't go through this last year. So I think it's being reintroduced next year. Encourage you to testify and recognize that this is something that needs to change, and I hope it'll happen soon. It was a lot. Wow. I'm happy to unpack step by step. Trying to throw a lot at you.
Elizabeth.
So I recently, a couple months ago, Dr. Suzuki, Canadian climate scientist, came out with a statement in an article about how it's effectively too late, and that, kind of piggybacking on what you said, that now it's more of building those smaller communities. And how I kind of think of it is not in the larger scope that you were talking about, but you mentioned something about reaching out to your neighbor and building those communities in our neighborhoods so that we can be responsive to those extreme events and this climate change that's here, that's happening.
Elizabeth, ask your question, please.
Yeah. So do you agree with him? And I know there's other scientists from Europe, et cetera, ICCC, things like that have all kind of said, it's too late. Let's start building community and reacting that way. So that's my question. Do you agree with that?
For humanist perspective, I will try. Let me try this out. You tell me if this is humanist or not, humanist enough or not. One of the most powerful human emotions, I think, is apathy. It can absolutely disable and create dysfunction within an individual's ability to take action on anything. And a claim like it's too late might be, to one, a call for action and we need to create local communities. And the same phrase could be to another, I'm done. Like, okay, it's too late. Let it just all burn down, right? So the individual response, whether the science is going to say it's too late, or we have 12 years, which I've seen, or we have a lot more time than that, which I've also seen, I'm not gonna, get into that. That's way over my pay grade in terms of doing calculations. And I definitely don't have a crystal ball to be able to say that, because the earth does really strange things as we're seeing, and humans do really strange things as we're seeing. And so the number of the uncertainty and the complexity in that is hard to say a date per se. So I go to like, what is our collective understanding and the meaning that we make out of a phrase like that? And that's where language, that's where dialogue, that's where coming together can really be an important instrument for collective action. And so sure, say what you want. We're going to hear a lot more of that, and there's going to be plenty of doom and gloom to be found. And so the question that I'd pose right back to you is, are you finding ways to be able to take that, like in this kind of an environment?
Considering all the other impacts on our, environment, exactly. That it seems that community building and going back to creating those third spaces, etc., whether that be at a block party or in a humanist society, then that's how we're going to get through whatever is coming. And that, especially because we've had with the digital age, much more of a separation and isolation happening in the last 20 years. So,
Great. Thank you for a good point there. Thank you.
Question number 2.
It's hard to hear the speakers asking the questions and the audience there. I can barely hear them on Zoom, and I'm not the only one who couldn't hear them on Zoom.
Maybe.
Okay, I'll repeat the question.
Perfect.
Yep,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Questioner number 2.
I'm very great talk.
Thanks.
Great talk. I was concerned. One of the things that you're talking about is the roads, the infrastructure. Are there scientists working on and doing it very quickly? Something other than asphalt to go on the roads? Because I've seen some things where you could have some permeation. That what I want to say, to get all that stuff out into the soil. Are there people working on that quickly?
Yeah. So the question related to roads, and the question is about whether people are working on making better roads to be able to address some of this, right? It's so much of our cities. In fact, if you look at LA, you would see that roughly LA is about 72% asphalt, and about 63% of that is parking. So we see like so much of roadway just being incredibly static and sitting there. There are people working on this. I will say there are 3 things that I point to. One is there's a whole movement trying to figure out how to just keep the roads as they are and shade roads. And so there's this aspect of reflecting things off, reflecting the sunlight off before it even gets down to human level. The second thing that's happening is I was just down in LA for a Reflect event that Climate Resolve, a nonprofit down in LA, has been active, and they're trying to paint roads and different colors. And there's huge industry push behind this, which I've not been a fan of putting lighter colors down low. I'm a fan of putting lighter colors up high, because in part, when you put that energy, when it hits that white surface, is going to bounce, and it's going to bounce and make the ambient environment really hot. Right. And we've measured that. We've actually able to see in light areas, yes, that surface is cool. That road is in fact cool, but the ambient surface is hot. Though the industry behind this likes to really focus on the fact that it will extend the longevity of that road, because it's not expanding and contracting from all of that heat that is occurring all the time. And so that allows, so there's that argument that I've heard. And the third thing is just there's a introduction of aggregate into the roads. I've seen this in Japan and a few other places where they bring in a lighter material into the roads, so that it's not a completely white road, but it's a road that reflects about 30 to 40% of what's called the albedo, or the reflectivity of that surface. So I've seen that as well. So there's people working on it. Material wise, the asphalt industry has it. Like they have it. That will be really hard to shift at this point because that is so deeply indoctrinated into our public works systems that asphalt is here for at least the next decade, if not more, is my guess. There are some permeable pavers like you're describing that are coming up. Though those are mostly used for stormwater and kind of permeating some of that stormwater, and they don't seem to have as much of an effect on the heat per se. So we're trying to figure out what are things that multi-solve this like rain event in the winter and heat event in the summer. But yeah, there is work happening in it. It feels right now like roads are one of the hardest infrastructure projects. I think housing is a little bit more accessible to me than the Department of Transportation.
Questioner number 3.
Go ahead.
Yes. You talk about the importance of green spaces. I count these as just amenities that make a neighborhood attractive. There are lots of others, cultural, economic, educational, all that stuff. But if you have a neighborhood that has all this stuff that makes it attractive, people move there and they crowd out the amenities. How are you going to break that cycle? It seems like in a neoliberal economy, popularity is always going to crowd out the amenities. Everything's going to go to the highest value use, and everything will be the same.
I like your wood cookie, Al. Thanks. I have one of those myself. So mine says chickadee on it. The question has to do with how do you keep what I'll interpret as the distribution of populations that occur in cities in this economy from crowding out areas that are really attractive and have a lot of amenities. In my mind, there's probably a couple of different ways that come to mind. One is kind of, we have to make more places desirable, right? Yeah. And that's hard to do, but we have to just make more places desirable. We have, I know from planning literature, actively invested in some neighborhoods and actively disinvested in other neighborhoods. That has been well established, and it's a kind of a human phenomenon that's played out across the country, and we've actually quantified some of that in a few papers. And so that neighborhood is attractive because there were agencies that were actively supporting that neighborhood and lifting up that neighborhood. And when that was happening, they were actively disinvesting and arguably pushing down other neighborhoods as in that. And so if I kind of take it back a step, those were decisions made by people in a bureau, people elected to office locally. And when I look at it really, then I'm thinking there's a lot of momentum in continuing to invest in certain neighborhoods, and other neighborhoods get forgotten. So my first thought is, what about those other neighborhoods? How do we actually think about those neighborhoods as investment and lifting up the cultural, educational, environmental conditions in those neighborhoods? It's kind of the first thing I go to. The second thing I go to is, I think what we want to do is really be careful about the notion of crowding out. And just from a human kind of social perspective and a kind of an empathy perspective, people love to put up walls around their spaces, and they love to say, we don't want people who are different than us. I've experienced this numerous times in my own life. We don't want people who don't fit into our community. And we have a long history of that as a species, going back thousands of years. And that to me is kind of at the heart of a really compassionate approach to how we would really think about this neighborhood amenity that we all are part of and don't want to necessarily put up walls up and keep people out. I'm not suggesting you're saying that. I'm more kind of unpacking what it means to feel like you're crowded out and feel like, and I think that's more of a personal human response of like, it was not like this before. Why are all these other people in my neighborhood now? And I hear a lot of that, and it's kind of like, really? Okay. I think we can do better than that. That's kind of where I go with this. We can keep talking about it. It's a deep topic.
Very complicated.
Uh-oh, what is that?
Okay.
That's not mine. Oh, sorry.
Okay. We have questioner number 4.
Number 4, please.
Yeah, hi. I was curious, like in all of either your research or travels or kind of visiting different communities, have there been like communities or cities that you found to be more like climate resistant or like any climate success stories? And like, what are they doing different? Or like, what are some of the key takeaways from like any kind of shining examples of some cities or groups of people that be like, all right, yeah, we're thinking about the right things and we're doing the right things.
Mm-hmm. So I think the question is about, are there, you said climate resilience? Yeah, so the question is about, are there shining examples or notable examples of places that have been trending in a very promising direction when it comes to climate action? And boy, there's so much there. I'm teaching a class this term actually, where I get to spend a whole bunch of time thinking about that. I will point to a few things that are really popular that's affected here too. There's been since the France Olympics, since Paris Olympics, there's been this big movement about swimmable urban rivers. And boy, that is a lovely series of words together, because I have been in places, namely our neighbor to the north, where they have cities where rivers are clean, they're beautiful, they're swimmable, all the parameters you would think about in terms of a healthy river are in place, including the healthy biology in these urban rivers. And that is a amazing movement. We've got the Willamette River, that's a big Superfund site for a big chunk of it, though there's a movement afoot that's actually about how do we make these rivers more accessible, more amenable to communities that want to go into the river, and I love where that's going. Like that to me is a very promising, and there's several examples of that. A second thing that this is so deep, this piece, but I'll just quickly mention, I love this movement that's happening in parts of the world where the US could learn from potentially, is giving rights to nature. There is a lot of interest in trying to recognize that we are one of multiple species on this planet, and we're here, we're strong, we're loud as a species, and yet there's so many other species that we never have given rights to, and in any way, including our one-legged kin of our trees. And I think about, how does that movement find its way? And how does that find its way into cities? How does that find its way into human-dominated landscapes like cities? And so that's an amazing piece that's happening. More directly, I think there's just a lot of interest in like doing these resiliency hubs. Like what I was mentioning, like buildings don't have a place people can go when it's smoky out or it's hot out. And there are these amazing movements to fund resiliency hubs. Seattle, actually, King County just moved forward a huge proposal to get communities to design their own resiliency hubs. And that's going to be something that's going to be far more relevant to more and more people, I think, going forward. So there are 3 big and small examples. Yeah.
Thank you. Question number 5.
My question is, have you partnered with Oregon OSHA who passed heat smoke rules last year, and then or the Department of Environmental Quality? Because June of 2021, we also had wildfires, which kept people in, and the people in the lower socio and economic status places don't have AC, which would filter the air. So they were also experiencing extreme heat, but also very dangerous air levels. Have you partnered? Are you partnering with either agency?
Yeah, OSHA is tricky right now to work with, just for a variety of reasons. I wrote an op-ed to the Oregonian after the heat dome saying we need to really recognize that these worker safety standards are very relaxed right now. We need a lot more attention. And I put a number in there. I thought it was the literature was saying 85 degrees for outdoor day laborers and the consistent exposure to that. Though I'd said 95 to 100 degrees. I even put a little bit of a range in there. And I got a bunch of email back saying, this is going to shut down our economy if you keep people from working outside. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're gonna let your kid go outside and run around at 100-degree temperature for several hours? Like, so it got me really thinking, like, as a community and as a agency, we've moved some laws. There is actually a lot of workplace safety that's working, and I'm working with some folks at the federal level to try to move this. Though there seems like this economy and safety conversation is very palpable to me. And if it's not presented well, if it's not presented tactfully with an evidence-based, if it's not done in a collective way, it's going to be a really hard conversation. But I mean, the agency, those worker safety agencies vary by state. Oregon's a lot more receptive to it than many other states. California, highly so as well. I've spoken in other states where I haven't had a moment of someone's time to bring up worker safety because it'll crush our economy, and we don't want that. I mean, that DEQ we've worked with before, but OSHA, Oregon, we haven't. I've just sent them notes. I don't go to any place I'm not invited. I'll tell you that much. Like, if they invite me to come, I'm happy to work with them, but I just like, do your thing. I'm going to send you notes and say, have you thought about, what about this? What about that? But yeah.
Okay. We have a question from our Zoom audience, which I just got covered up. Here we go. This is from Hank Robb. Is there, it just doesn't want me to see it. Is there a potential conflict between more trees around buildings and trees as fuel for fire, for wildfires?
Oh yeah, that's good. Interesting. This is an entirely early conversation. I mean, intuitively, conceptually, we can make the connection relatively quickly. A friend of mine was telling, a colleague of mine was telling me that he lives in Northwest and he had a tree there in an apartment complex, and the tree during a big windstorm hit the apartment complex, and everybody in the board of directors or the apartment board said, chop them all down, right? That's our often response. And what we're finding is that well-maintained trees, cared for, generally trees that are watched, people are paying attention to what's happening to the environment around them. Those trees don't have issues during extreme heat, nor generally speaking, they don't have extreme heat issues or wind throw issues when they're well taken care of. So that's really what it comes down to me, is how do you make sure you're watching, caring for, it's a living thing. So it needs, love and feeding.
That's right.
And so part of it is how do you actually pay attention to those trees? And yeah.
Right. Thank you. Question number 6.
Be our last question. Question number 6.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
What are your thoughts about the role of biodiversity in having a healthy tree canopy that can handle all these, challenges of both the built environment and people being hard on trees and the actual physical phenomena of heat waves and drought and things like that? Is there a good understanding that it's not going to be 4 different trees coming from a nursery that are going to solve the problem, but a healthy ecosystem for the trees that are adaptive already to then get dispersed and to continue to expand their territory and therefore make it, nicer for us as humans?
Yeah.
If you have thoughts about biodiversity.
Yes, it's about biodiversity and trees specifically in terms of a lot of these challenges that I was setting up. If people are aware right now, I'm sure you've probably seen some of the coverage on this little tiny beautiful insect, but very, very powerful insect called the emerald ash borer. EAB has arrived in Oregon 2 years ago and now was found in Portland a couple weeks ago. And this little critter can take out a series of ash, which include like olive and other trees, and it can do it overnight. Like literally, we've seen maps in the Midwest and Colorado where the emerald ash borer was first noticed, and entire states of Illinois that had gone to certain nurseries, entire states of Michigan, Indiana, that had just heavily planted ash trees all across their public parking strip, their right-of-ways, and in their parks. You can see from satellites. I have seen from satellites the before after, and it's extraordinary. Like, it's within one summer, all the trees, literally in every neighborhood, are gone. And the ash borer is very prolific and can move. And so that's the case right now more than ever for biodiversity in in the species of trees that we have. The other side of the coin of that is tricky in some ways because we're still trying to figure out whether these evolutionarily adapted trees for the Pacific Northwest are able to handle some of the extreme events that we're seeing. Some of our work has noticed that during the heat wave, the heat dome, in 2021, we looked at some of the trees before and after, and I've seen in parks that I walk my dogs in, like I've seen like these red cedars that have been here for time immemorial starting to die at the top, and they slowly start to dry. And that's a well-established, likely 80-year-old tree that's actually encountering. And we've measured that it's about 3,000 gallons of water moving through the stem a day. It's a lot of movement and evaporation, transpiration that's happening in that tree. And so we're trying to identify some mechanisms for what is causing some of these die-offs of trees that have been here a long time, whether that be big leaf maple, Doug fir, red cedar. The yellow cedar, Alaska, often there's a few of those here. They seem to be doing okay. So there's some real puzzles as to like which of these species are actually going to be doing better than others, and it's an ongoing line of research. I know Friends of Trees, who I've worked with quite a bit, they planted some blue oaks in Eugene, which is like Sacramento. It's like California. Like they're experimenting, and I'm working with the city of Milwaukee, Oregon. I'm trying to get their forester to think a little bit about doing some experimental planting of trees to see how well they do over time, because we're still trying to figure that out. And then you put a tree in a hot place like Lentz Park, or a cool place like Eastmoreland or Laurelhurst Park, same tree doing very differently in those two environments. And we're then asking, like, what is that immediate microclimate that's affecting those trees? And so not only is a species layer, but then you're like location layer on top of that, which is creating a little bit more job security for me.
That's right. Dr. Shandak, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for your good work. I mean, that's amazing. It just honors science, and you made it simple for us to understand. Thank you so much.
Hopefully not simplistic.
Yeah, no, but
all right, thank you.
So often you hear, well, it's too late. It's too late. Like Elizabeth said, it's too late. And you just gave us some things to do. And that's much appreciated.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad we're having the conversation.
I am too. Thank you.
Yep.